This is episode 1161.
Because when you think about like a carve-out, it's sort of akin to like a startup, right? Like we're carving out this business and it's going to be like a startup and we're really not that. We're a multi-billion-dollar business with thousands of employees across all these different legal entities. And so I think that's unique for us, right? Like, and I was talking to Shankar, our CEO, about it. We were talking about when we're just getting things started. It's like, you're just getting your pilot license, and instead of going to some small plane, like the first plane that you're flying is like a 747, right? And so that's kind of like what it's like for us to manage Omnissa. We're at a stage from a company standpoint where we're still focused on growth. We are ultimately focused on increasing value to our shareholders, whether that be our LPs, whether that be our PE partners, whether that be our debt investors, our employees, right? Like we're trying to create value for those shareholders. And the quickest way for us to do that is through growth.
Before we meet with today's guest, I want to set the table a bit, because this conversation isn't really about job titles or even about technology. It's about what happens when finance is asked to grow up fast, really fast. Imagine stepping into a role where the business already has scale, complexity, and expectations, but none of the safety nets you'd normally rely on. That's the tension we explore today. We talk about how finance moves from reporting to judgment, from metrics to meaning, and from growth at all costs to growth that actually lasts. Our talk with CFO Steve Shimizu begins after this. Hello, CFO Steve Shimizu is with us. Steve spent nearly 13 years at Cisco building a strong operating foundation inside a global technology leader before stepping into broader finance leadership roles. That experience, his ability to pair financial rigor with strategic perspective, especially when finance needs to move beyond reporting and help guide real business decisions. Today, as CFO of Omnissa, Steve sits at the intersection of growth, discipline, and technology transformation. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, as always, we're going to ask you to look back, and we'd like you to identify some of those experiences you feel prepared you for the CFO role. What comes to mind?
Sure. So I would say that, it's interesting. When I look at the different chapters of my career, I started my career in public accounting, and I was fortunate enough to have started my career in public accounting at a time when a lot of companies were going public. So it was during the original .com boom. And so I had the opportunity to work on a lot of IPOs. But when I originally started, my plan was to get my CPA and then move on and get my law degree. And I wanted to go down the sort of the business law path. But during that time, what it allowed me to do is it gave me opportunity to see, what are the attorneys doing? What are the investment bankers doing? What are the management teams doing? And what are the accountants doing? And so what I determined at that time is really what I want to do is sort of pivot and move into mergers and acquisitions. So started in public accounting. What I would say that chapter allowed me to do is sort of build sort of a foundation of understanding financial statements, how the financial statements flow, what are the different, balance sheet, cash flow, income statement, interdependencies, and then move on to sort of the second chapter of my career, which is really transactional focused. So I was focused in software M&A at a time when there was clearly lots of acquisitions, divestitures, and consolidation. And what that experience allowed me to do is, you're in a situation where you go into a data room, and sort of back then a data room was a physical room, right? Like it's not the virtual data rooms where we have now. And there's boxes piled to, the ceiling, and you go into a room and you're there for like maybe 3 days, filtering through all of the data. And your job is to go in and say, out of all this information that we're collecting for my client, what are the 3 things that they need to know in order to make a purchase offer or not? Right. And so you're taking a lot of data and you're discerning it into what are the big animal picture takeaways. So for me, for that chapter in my career, it gave me an opportunity to do that. I worked in investment banking for a number of years, and I moved over to HP's M&A group and then over to Cisco's corp dev group. And then I would say I sort of hit maybe the third inflection point from a career standpoint. And I took a step back and I said, geez, I'm very transactional focused. I've got a lot of experience doing transactions. I don't have a tech background. If companies like Cisco that I was at the time stopped doing acquisitions, then I would be out of a job. And so I looked to get into more operational finance type roles. Sat down with the CFO of Cisco at the time, and he gave me some great advice. He said, this is what you do. What you do is next time we do a big platform acquisition, you move into a two-in-a-box role with that CFO and you run that division for us as a standalone. And then over the next 18 months or 2 years, your job is to integrate each of the functions into Cisco, right? So accounting went into accounting, treasury went into treasury, sales finance went into sales finance. But it gave me this really interesting opportunity or petri dish to come in a very safe environment and learn the interconnectivity of all the different finance functions. And that sort of became my thing. So I moved from platform acquisition to platform acquisition within Cisco. That then created an opportunity for me at VMware. And then from VMware, I would say that experience really served me well in this journey that we've been on with Omnissa. So in terms of different events, I would say having an accounting foundational background definitely helped. Having an investment banking in terms of like, what is the strategic, takeaways that you need to pull out of this? How do you craft an argument? How do you present financials in a certain way that are digestible for people to understand at an executive level? And then all the operational rigor of what's all the behind the scenes statutory filings, tax work, treasury work that happens to actually run the operations of a company. And so that sort of built me and gave me the background and the experience to lead me into the role that I have today.
Wow. A great overview for us, Steve. Thank you for that. You mentioned stepping into VMware, of course, and I guess Omnissa is was it a carve-out, or how would you characterize that transaction that took place?
Yeah, so Omnissa was a carve-out. So Omnissa previously was a division within VMware. VMware was acquired by Broadcom. So it was sort of this unique experience in which we were sort of a divestiture within an acquisition, right? So Broadcom was coming in and acquiring the broader VMware. And in tandem to that, we were looking to divest EUC. At the time, the division was called EUC, which has now become Omnissa. And so, yeah, great learning experience there. Running a division within a large company is very, very different than running a standalone entity.
Yeah.
And so that has been a journey. That's been a process. It's been, I would say probably the best learning experience that I've had from a career perspective, going through that process and going through that journey.
Was this about reestablishing some of the finance functions, capabilities that weren't there once carved out? You had to rebuild, I would imagine.
That's right. So I would say if we take a step back and if you think about when there's a carve out of a division, like why does that happen? And when does that make sense, right? And a lot of times that happens because you have a division within a larger enterprise, like a VMware or a large enterprise software company that is maybe tangential to their core businesses. And so there's this belief that that business is being sub-optimized because you're optimizing for the remaining 80%. Right. And so I would say that hypothesis was what we went into with the idea of, could we take this division and carve it out and make it something bigger than it was within VMware? And that still holds true, right? Now, the challenge that we have, like when you think about a carve out, I would say there's sort of two phases that you have, Jack. You have a phase of, how do I create the infrastructure to be able to run a business as a standalone entity? So to your point, things like accounts payable or accounts receivable or accounting, that was all done at the broader VMware level. There's not a specific treasury function for that division, right? And so you go through this period of carve out instability or instability of, I have to take this business that was part of a larger business and stand up the operational infrastructure to be able to support, in our case, a multi-billion-dollar business with, almost 4,000 employees globally. And that's a lot of work and a lot of risk, and took a lot of Herculean efforts by lots of people in different functions to get us there, right? So that's sort of, I would say, part A of the journey of a carve out. Part B is, if we go back to the premise of, why did we do the carve out to begin with? That to me really is saying, okay, you truly believe that you can take this and you can make it something greater because it was being sub-optimized. And with that comes change, right? And comes transformation and comes evolution. And so that piece, now that we've created a very stable multi-billion-dollar business, we're now moving on to the phase of, okay, how do we make this and enable this company to be what we all think it can be? And so that's the journey that we're going on next.
Yeah, that's a great segue for us. Let's ask you about Omnissa then. Tell us about, what is the company? What is this company about? What is its offerings?
Yeah, so Omnissa, I think, is at an exciting intersection of what we would call enabling companies to have their employees have a digital employee experience. And so you think about that and you're like, well, what does that mean, right? And the easiest way for me to describe it is, you're enabling companies to allow their employees to work from anywhere on any device, right? So you're helping them deploy, secure, consume physical endpoints in the form of cell phones, physical endpoints in the form of desktops, and then also virtual endpoints, right? So virtual environments. And so if you think about a scenario where you have an employee that is on vacation in the mountains somewhere, and they say, geez, I left my laptop at home, I'm traveling. If you had a virtual desktop environment, you could go to any desktop and you could say, okay, I'm going to access my device from the cloud. And it would pull up what looks like to them to be their PC that they would have at home. And so it creates flexibility both in a physical environment and a virtual environment. And so that's, the exciting thing I would say for Omnissa in terms of the journey that we're going on is, we're end user computing, right? So like end user computing, in terms of what that means, is in this massive evolution of, it's basically any device that consumes information. And if you think about what that can be now in our world, it's, started with a desktop, moved on to a laptop, moved on to a mobile device. But now we're consuming data in the form of vending machines, hand scanners at retail stores, our cars. Everything is consuming data. And so it's creating this unique environment for us to be able to really play and help companies expand that footprint, help their employees, be more efficient, more productive from anywhere they are within the world.
At Omnissa's current stage, how do you think about growth versus discipline? What's your focus here?
Yeah, so it's hard, right? Because when you think about like a carve out, it's sort of akin to like a startup, right?
Yeah.
Like we're carving out this business and it's going to be like a startup and we're really not that. We're a multi-billion dollar business with thousands of employees across all these different legal entities. And so I think that's unique for us, right? Like, and I was talking to Shankar, our CEO, about it. We were talking about when we were just getting things started. It's like, you're just getting your pilot license, and instead of going to some small plane, like the first plane that you're flying is like a 747, right? And so that's kind of like what it's like for us to manage Omnissa. But we're at a stage from a company standpoint where we're still focused on growth. We are ultimately focused on increasing value to our shareholders, whether that be our LPs, whether that be our PE partners, whether that be our debt investors, our employees, right? Like we're trying to create value for those shareholders. And the quickest way for us to do that is through growth. So as we grow top line, that will create more value for the business. And I would say not just growth, but I would put a twist on it that it's profitable growth, right? And so, you can't run a multi-billion dollar business at this scale and just say, we're just going to focus on growth, because you would run out of cash really quickly. And so there's a unique intersection where we are focused on growth. We're really focused on profitable growth and trying to strike a balance between the two, which is, that like to me is sort of one of the foundations on which a CFO role resides, right? Like, how do I find that balance of what is the right level of investment to drive growth? And how do I also at the same time make sure I'm creating financial stability for our company?
Where does finance have the biggest opportunity within Omnissa to be a sort of a proactive business partner? Finance leaders love telling us how they partner with the business, but given the history of Omnissa, and where you are today, where do you have the biggest opportunity to become a more proactive business partner?
So if we go back to the narrative of we're going through this transformation, there's lots of decisions that we need to make, whether that be on the go-to-market front, whether that be on the product front, what markets do we play in, what verticals do we play in. And so to me, that's where we come in from a finance perspective. And what allows us to have those types of conversations is not just data, right? So if you just take data and you say, okay, we're a SaaS business, right? So very SaaS oriented metrics, and you have your traditional ARR and gross retention rates and net retention rates. What enables a finance leader to be successful in engaging in those transformational conversations is continuing to double click into a data point that you get to a point where somebody can make a decision based off of that or take action. Right. So we don't just look at gross retention rates, but we say, okay, well, what is that on a by geo basis? And then what is that on a by segment basis within Americas? And what is the productivity that we're driving on a per rep? And, does that change based off the products? If I add one of our Workspace ONE enterprise products plus DEX, does that increase adoption? And so really making it tangible and actionable for our leadership team. And then I would say that the next level is like accountability, right? So if you put together a metric, you say, okay, we're going to make this decision based off of these metrics. You have to go back and you have to measure it and you have to say, was that the right decision? Right? Did we make the right decision? And some of them you're getting it right, and some of them you're going to get wrong. But like to me, that's really important as a finance leader. Is it has to be quantifiable. It has to be something that's actionable. It has to be something that resonates with your other leadership team, right? And so, as finance professionals, you and I think about things like gross retention rates and AR and growth like that, and like that's very we understand it at a deep enough level. But if you're talking to an engineering leader and you say, well, our growth retention rate on this product is dropping, that may not resonate with them, right? And so you have to be able to say, okay, here's what this means, right? Like if you look at the customers that we have, we're trying to figure out what percentage of our customers are staying with our product. And if they're leaving, then why, right? And is there something that we can do from a product perspective? Is there something we can do from a customer engagement perspective? And what are the levers that we're going to pull to try to get there?
So let me ask this question. What does success look like for you as a CFO over the next 12 to 24 months? I guess, which outcomes will tell you that you're on the right path?
Success to me looks like, are we driving the appropriate level of conversations to make decisions at the right inflection points, right? And so finance, I believe, is, with all of the data that we have, especially for like a SaaS business that's very dependent on its install base and health of your ARR, has a unique opportunity here to play a very strategic role. What I'm learning is that there's like almost no conversation that is not relevant for finance to have a seat at the table. Could be with a key vendor, it could be with a key customer, it could be with the head of, CPO trying to make product portfolio decisions. There's a financial implication to all of those decisions. And so you can insert yourself to drive the appropriate level of conversation. So part A of success is, are we having the right level of discussions? Are we engaging on the topics that we need to engage on? And are we able to actually look at the data, both positive and negative, and make decisions based off of it? That would be sort of phase one of success. Phase two of success to me would be, okay, are we willing to go back and look at those decisions and say, we made the right decisions or we made the wrong decisions, and pivot appropriately from a company perspective? And then part C would be, I would not define our success as, we're going to drive a 20% growth, we're going to, increase EBITDA by a certain percentage. I think success for us from a company perspective means you're continuing to grow, you're continuing to improve, right? The pace at which you grow, everybody would like to grow faster, everybody would like to increase their profits faster. But if you're doing so and your trajectory suggests, hey, we're making progress, we're not static, we're hopefully never declining, right? That would be success. Is enabling Omnissa to capture the opportunity that it has and make the most of the opportunity and the market opportunity.
We want to touch on AI with you, and
sure.
We're wondering, how do you evaluate AI, and how AI can create real leverage versus when it's just noise? How do you make that evaluation today?
I mean, AI, stating the obvious, is obviously completely changing how companies operate internally and how we market our products externally, right? And I believe at its base level, there's just more and more data that's available that will help enable companies to create value for their customers and also to run their businesses more effective, right? So if we think about for Omnissa from an external perspective in terms of how we think about how we build AI into the market, our goal is to create a platform between the physical device and the virtual device that will create a unified platform of data. If you have a unified platform of data across 26,000 customers, millions of devices, a massive opportunity in different use forms from an AI perspective to allow our customers to be more secure, make quicker decisions, make better decisions, all of those things, right? Internally, in terms of how we think about AI, is how do we use the data that we have and make ourselves more productive and make ourselves more effective, right? And I'll give you one example for us. So when we think about AI, to your point earlier, a lot of the first chapter for the Omnissa journey was, let's just build up the infrastructure to be able to run the business. We needed to stand up our own HRMS system, stand up our own billing system, create all of our own bank account, all of that, right? Now that we're looking at, okay, now we've done that. Can we operate our business more efficiently? The two platforms that I would say we're sort of initially exploring and leveraging would be on the go-to-market side. When you think about sales forecasting, can we use AI to have better pipe clarity? Can we use AI to understand how our sales organization is engaging with customers and what's enabling them to be successful when they're successful, and what's creating shortfalls when we have shortfalls, right? And so there's lots of different AI tools out there that help you think through that journey and evaluate the health of your pipeline. That's one area for us. The second area is when you think about customer support, right? Like, how do we support the customer? And we have, thousands of customers, and if an issue arises, they submit a support ticket. Like, a lot of the support tickets are very simplistic in nature. And so how can we use AI to make that process more seamless for customers, make it a better experience for the customer, and a quicker turnaround internally from an operational standpoint for Omnissa?
When you make AI-related investments, can you share with us what is your sort of ROI mindset relative to compared to other investment?
Yeah, so when we think about AI, the two use cases I would say are very different in terms of how we think about the deployment, right? Like the first, I would say from a measurement perspective, back to like, hey, let's measure this to see if this is working and this is making us more successful, is really on the go-to-market front, are we more efficient with our sales organization, and are we enabling our sales teams to be more productive? So if you think about sort of the basic productivity metrics, if you think about your pipeline creation, if you think about your pipeline close rates, are those staying the same? Are those going backwards? Or are they improving, right? Hopefully they're improving. Then you would say, okay, maybe not solely contributed to our AI deployment, but probably definitely a factor in terms of what's enabling us to be more successful. On the internal side, in terms of thinking about it, we really look at what type of productivity gains can we have. So if we're measuring, we get 500 tickets a day, and it's taken us this long to resolve the tickets. When you deploy AI, can you decrease the amount of time that it's taking you to resolve the tickets? If you can do so, then from a cost perspective, that's helping you from an employee burden standpoint. And then from a customer perspective, it's improving the customer experience. So sort of two different metrics in terms of productivity from a top line growth, and then from a productivity standpoint internally, and are we becoming more efficient with closing out issues or resolving issues that customers have from a technical standpoint. So many different use cases, right? I think from a CFO perspective, the data points that we're going to have available to us to help drive the appropriate decisions and discussions is just going to grow tremendously. One of the areas that I think that will happen imminently is definitely on the workforce front, right? So when you think about managing a global organization and managing something like a pay and promotion cycle, that there's thousands of employees with different comps for different markets, different ways to compensate those employees, and just a lot of data that's available for us to make the appropriate decisions and make sure that you're pulling the right leverage points, right? That's going to be definitely a use case that's going to be important for any CFO, I think, moving forward, right? When you think about a software company in particular, generally 70+% of the costs are headcount related. So as you think about, can I have more data available to make the appropriate workforce management decisions? That will be a use case. When we think about managing our company from an AI perspective moving forward within software in particular, I think what we're finding is, one of the use cases that AI is able to help optimize is solving very complex mathematical problems, such as computer programming, right? And so that's sort of evolving how we think about where do we spend our resources, and how can we leverage AI to help with something like computer programming. And so that's, if you look across the software industry, I think the inflection point that everyone is at, whether it's an Oracle or a Microsoft, right? Every enterprise software company is evaluating that question.
Well, nice insight there for us. We are up to what we like to refer to as our finance strategic moment questions, Steve. And as I mentioned up front, this is where we just ask you to share a moment of insight that you've experienced along the way. What would you like to share with us as a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, I would say, like, this experience right now is a consolidation of all the experiences that I've had prior to leading up to this, right? And so going through, how do we set up the operational infrastructure to be able to support a multi-billion-dollar business? Definitely leverages the public accounting side of things, right? Going through a pitch book process, which took 6 months. You're meeting with dozens of potential investors. Definitely leveraged the investment banking experience. And then now thinking about how we transform the business, leveraging metrics, managing relationships. That definitely is leveraging the operational finance experience that I've had. But I think the one thing, we've talked a lot about AI and how AI is evolving things. The one thing that it can't replace yet is, how do you interact with your colleagues, right? Like, how do you apply EQ to different decision making? How do you use intuition? How do you look around the corner, define, what's coming up next? And so that, when we think about transforming the business and growing the business and helping Omnissa through its journey and what the different decision points are going to be for this large enterprise software company, is going to heavily rely on not just the technical acumen, but sort of the building relationships, having the ability to have conversations at the right level, having those conversations be productive, is, one of the areas that, at least right now, AI isn't able to replace. And to me is a critical skill set for any executive, whether it be CFO, CEO, CPO, to have to be successful in their roles.
Nice. Thank you for that. It's interesting. Was there a time during your VMware days when this opportunity began to come into focus? Were you on board from the start? Or did someone propose this to you? Did you buy a ticket early on, or did you have to be convinced in some way?
Yeah, so I had been working with the EUC division for 7 years prior to the Broadcom acquisition. And so my role was more of it. EUC was one of the divisions that I supported. When we started going down this path, it was really interesting having conversations with Broadcom leadership team and how they think through things, and how they're very direct with their decision making, right? And so there's an efficiency that they have in their decision making process that was eye-opening. And so that whole process, I think, was a great learning opportunity for me to see how their CEO really sat down, went through every single division and said, okay, we're going to do this with this division, we're going to do this with this division, we're going to do this with this division. And then used the pitch book process to sort of evaluate, okay, as we get closer to the finish line, who are the leaders that we want to put on the bus to sort of take this to the next chapter. And so there was a little bit of an evolution there that we had. But it's a very tight knit leadership team, and so we've been able to grow together, learn together. The one thing I will say that I've learned is it's really interesting taking a division and becoming a CFO of a standalone company. And there's so many interdependencies that you have on every function operating appropriately for us to be successful as a business that you take for granted when you're a division within a larger enterprise, right? So payroll, as an example, right? You just take for granted that payroll is going to happen and it's going to work. When you're the CFO or the CHRO and you're responsible for payroll, it takes a whole nother meaning, right? And so you start to realize that a company is like a coral reef, and like it's going to thrive or it's going to not thrive based off of every single organism and function playing its part. And so that's definitely been true with Omnissa, is every single function has to play its role for us to be successful as a company.
Wow. An exciting chapter. Hey, we always like to ask our guests before we go to reflect a little on the personal side with us, Steve. Something about your past, some, I don't know, pursuit that you had, interest that you have that most people might not know about. Anything you can share with us?
Sure. So, I would say one of the things that shaped me from a work perspective is I was very active in sports growing up. I was convinced, as I'm sure most fifth graders are, that they're going to be the next NBA star. And so that was sort of the path that I was going down. I have had numerous knee surgeries. I've torn both of my Achilles. I've had 4 surgeries on my elbow. And so I only bring that up because I look back on that, I reflect on that, and I think that, like, to me at that point in time in my life, like, that was the most traumatic experience that I can go through, right? Like, you're so convinced that you're going to achieve something, and then you take this setback in the form of an injury, and building the mental fortitude to say, okay, like, this is all part of the process, right? Building the grind to be able to work your way through challenging situations. So to me, that was part of what shaped me into the person that I am today. And I always tell my kids, it's not so much what you achieve, it's, the effort and the process that you go through in achieving that. And, like, it's okay to have, difficult times, right? That's going to happen to everybody. It's how you react to those difficult times that makes you successful in life.
Wow. Great story for us. Hey, what about a book or a resource, something that maybe influenced your thinking along the way? Something that, I don't know, maybe it's something you escape with. Anything?
So my favorite is John Wooden books. I've read numerous of his books, and the one that I'm reading most recently, my son just got me for Christmas, and it's taking sort of John Wooden's fame, like pyramid of success, and then taking the different building blocks and then sort of expanding on the building blocks and saying, this is like how to think about a time when you went through this scenario. So whether it's friendship or grit, and how to think about your current life. My son's currently playing soccer in college, and so his team is all reading it, and so he got it for me as a gift, and I've been reading it, and it's been great. I think the principle of success is defined not by what you achieve, but like becoming the best person, the best father, the best CFO, the best colleague that you can be, whatever that ends up being is the ultimate determination of success. Really resonates with me, so I enjoy reading his books.
Wow, nice way of looking at the world, for sure. So thank you for sharing that. We are up to our final question. This is where we ask you to look forward. Finally, we're interested in what your priorities are for the coming 12 months. What would those be?
Definitely, from a company perspective, making sure that we are setting forth a financial plan that is going to set up Omnissa not just over the next 12 months, but in the long run, right? Like, how do we build a plan that is getting us to be successful, not just in our fiscal year 27, but fiscal year 28, fiscal year 29? What are the discussions and decisions we need to make with the board to be able to drive that success? I think a lot of times, definitely in different environments, you can get focused on short-term deliverables or short-term achievements. And so driving that vision of, are we investing enough in innovation? Are we investing enough in our people to be able to create a good experience for the team? That's important to me. What's also important to me is there's been a lot of Herculean efforts that have happened across multiple functions to get Omnissa to where it is today. And how do we continue to create growth opportunities for our employees so that they look back at their time at Omnissa and say, well, geez, that was a great learning opportunity for me. And I've got an opportunity to really achieve something with a group of people that I enjoyed being around. So how do we continue to support our employees, give them growth opportunities, and make sure that they're both challenged and feel rewarded at the same time?
Wow. Steve Shimizu, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you for having me. Enjoyed the conversation.